If you're the person who reads and reads and reads for hours on end without actually taking anything in, it's because you're doing it all wrong. My name is Zain Asif, I'm a third year medical student, and in this video we are going through the exact steps, one by one, everything that you need to know to read and understand your topics very quickly, regardless of how difficult they are. And as requested, this is a live demonstration, so I'll be studying a med school topic right in front of you. And I swear, no one does this, but I will literally be showing you how I go through information, how I create recall questions, my entire process, all of it in real time. So let's get into the second video of the live studying series. Most of you just start a topic and start reading through it line by line, word by word, and then end up getting stuck 2 minutes in, trying to read the same things 10 times over, trying to force it in somehow. But the key to actually getting through a ton of information very quickly and understanding it effortlessly is learning in layers. This means that when you're studying a topic very consciously, organize the way you take in the information, easiest to hardest. And the fact is that no textbook, no teacher actually teaches the information in this way. You're the one that actually has to structure the knowledge that you need to understand. You're the one that has to first figure out and think through what the topic is actually about. That's the first layer. Only then do you go on to reading the general concepts, visualizing the processes. That's the second layer. And after you've spent time understanding 80% of it, that's when you now go back through all of it and look at the complex 20% details, the 20% of things that were actually difficult to understand on the first go through. But now that you've done all of this work, it's not as hard. That's the third layer. That's all layering is. Literally think of taking in the knowledge like you're building a house. The walls and the floors are the first layers, then come in the doors and the furniture, that's the second layer, and then you end up with the third layer of the stuff, the decor, the paintings. The house has to be constructed in a layer by layer fashion. You can't just put in paintings and stuff when there's no walls. The same applies to learning. Anyways, enough foreplay, let's get started with the actual studying. Today we are doing liver diseases. The first layer is the basic concepts. As soon as you start learning a topic, the first step is only to take in the easiest foundational layer of information. This means skimming through the entire chapter, looking up keywords that you don't know, watching basic videos, very generally making sense of how each big topic links together. In our study process, we do this by first skimming through a bunch of resources and then creating a mind map. Instead of just reading through different concepts one by one and then afterwards trying to connect them and make sense of them, what I do is I start with creating a mind map, a structure that helps me link the big topics and see how they work together. This is the mind map I made for liver diseases. Firstly, you see that it has a very clear flow. It's very visual, as you can see, so I'll remember it. But the key thing with this is that I found a memorable way to connect both of these conditions through one central idea, which is the progression of how bad the liver gets as both the diseases worsen it. First it's fat, then it becomes fat and inflamed, then it ends up being fibrosed and cirrhosed. Or at least that's what I think it is from the minimal work I've done so far. The reason making this initial mind map is actually very useful is because right from the start it forces me to think about how everything that I'm going to be learning about actually works, which is way better than just normally skimming through the topic and glancing over the stuff in the beginning anyways. I really suggest watching the previous live video I made of me making the mind map. It's linked here. It shows my entire process. But overall, all I've done so far is I've skimmed, I've read through some definitions, and I've watched a few basic videos. Took me around 30 minutes and I already have such a clear mental model. Such an easy way to think about all of these conditions, and now I can start to study in more detail. Now I'm actually going to start going through the topics in more detail. Now comes the second layer. This is where I'm going to try and understand the general concepts, visualize processes, and side by side create my recall questions as well. I'll talk about how I create those in a minute after I've actually done some studying, but do note that my aim was not to read through everything right now. It's just the general concepts, ignoring all the complex stuff, the details that I don't need to know that I will have to memorize at a certain point. My aim is to get that second layer right. Anyways, let's get started. So as you saw, I was using multiple resources to learn the topic, a high-yield textbook, online websites. I'm side by side creating my own recall questions throughout the entire process. But overall, the aim here was to get a very good gist of all the conditions that I need to learn, two in this case, without looking at that many details. And of course, side by side, also create my recall questions. As I went through the investigations, the management, how these conditions even work, I converted everything that I need to know for my exams into these recall questions. It's usually a very simple list list of questions that are just divided by the topic and the conditions that I need to know that week. But the point is, every few sentences I'm thinking, okay, what's important here? What's important for me to remember? Okay, how can I convert that into a question? And then per section, per few sentences, I'm writing 2 or 3 questions down, seeing what is important, seeing what works, editing throughout. By this point, I've been doing this for years now, so I'm used to understanding the topic very quickly and side by side just making these questions as I go along. But of course, if you want to take your time to understand, build the layers of knowledge first, and then do these questions after you have a bit of understanding, then that's fine as well. It's just a bit slower. The reason I create these recall questions is so that when I come back to revise this topic, I can straight away start to test myself on it. Testing yourself should always be the main form of revision. And these questions become the perfect resource to then actively recall and force yourself to remember, what did I learn and understand that last time? And there's a method for it. Let me quickly explain it and give you an insight into how I use these questions. Step 1, in my next revision session, when I come back to look at this topic, I will try and look at those questions and answer them and try and recall whatever I remember to the best of my ability. I'll answer them out loud, or I may write them down. Usually I don't. I usually just answer them out loud, and I do it without using any resources. Like, honestly, I spent several minutes formulating and thinking through the answers in my head, because frankly, I know the more effort I put into this, the more I will actually end up remembering for the next time. Step 2, once I've tried my best to actively recall those 2 to 4 questions or whatever makes sense for the section that I need to know, I'll then go back to the resources and fully scan them and check back with where my understanding was lacking. It's an active process of correction. I get a few questions semi-right, maybe wrong, and I go back and look through the entire resource and read through in context where my understanding isn't full yet. This is important. The reading and the question answering shouldn't be 2 separate activities. They need to be more interlinked. Step 3, I color code these questions red, orange, green, depending on how difficult I found them, and that way when I come back to revise them for the next session, I can immediately jump to the red questions, the stuff I didn't know, and focus on my weaknesses. And lastly, step 4 of this process is to keep repeating it. Keep repeating this fluid process of answering a few questions, going back to the resources, correcting my understanding for the next time that I come now to revise this. And also, by the way, the quality of these questions isn't final. It will improve after these first revisions, because only after testing yourself will you then realize, okay, what do I actually need to recall and test myself on, and what have I just put on the questions just because it was there in my resources. In my future revisions, I'll constantly be adding questions, I'll constantly be removing, and by the end this list will be completely different based on what I find ends up being most important. Anyways, let's continue to the final layer, the details. I'm gonna go through things that I found difficult, the complex information, the guidelines that I haven't gone through yet, and I'll continue to add to my recall questions throughout the process, of course. I know it's time-lapse, but as you can see, I was reading through and getting through concepts and all of their details much quicker compared to if I was just linearly reading through the website. Understanding entire conditions, creating the mind map, creating all these questions in less than an hour. The studying is just a lot more chill and easier, because my brain by this point had enough prior knowledge ready to support the new difficulty of the knowledge actually coming in. Because I had skimmed first, made a mind map, found a good structured way of thinking about all of these diseases and how they work, was I then able to easily understand the way these conditions progress, their investigations, how they're diagnosed, how they're treated, everything. As you saw, I didn't really get stuck at all. I didn't have to repeatedly read anything. The difficult stuff just isn't difficult. And keep in mind, I've never genuinely looked at these conditions nor understand them properly before. The liver was always a mystery to me. Anyways, that was my learning process, using layers to understand, creating questions side by side. I'll definitely keep on going with this live studying series. I'll show you how I test myself, how I memorize difficult details, and all of this sort of stuff, different parts of my studying process. But for now, I really hope this video has helped. Leave a like, spam the comments, and I will see you in the next one.